Recording now. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Remind podcast. My name's David Masterton and I'm joined by the wonderful Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. Let's try that again. Dr. Ashleigh Moreland. There we go.
You've only said it in 99 episodes.
Oh, what a segue into the fact that next week's going to be our 100th episode. So it's going to be a big one. We're going to live stream it. And so let us know what you'd like to talk about in the comments below, or just join us on the day. We're going to put plenty of information out starting sort of this week as to when it's going to be. We haven't landed on a time just yet, but we'll give you plenty of notice. Now, thinking about 100 episodes, am I feeling anxious about this? Do I have anxiety? No, I don't. Having said that, I do get a little worried that when we do it, is anyone going to watch? Is anyone going to comment?
What if they think I'm an idiot? What if they don't like it? What if they judge? What if they leave a mean comment? What if?
Wow, these all sounds like anxiety. So in this episode, we're talking about anxiety and sort of exactly what part of anxiety would you like to explore today, Ash?
Just the anxiety, the anxious anxiety part.
Just general anxiety.
Yeah, okay. We'll talk about anxiety in general. So we were kind of having this conversation going, man, considering so much of what we talk about really does touch on mental health, we don't have that many episodes where we talk about, I guess, the diagnostic side of mental health or mental illness, the flip side. Yep. And we spoke last week about ADHD, and anxiety and ADHD tend to go hand in hand just because of the way that the nervous system functions. So we spoke last week about nervous system dysregulation and the hypervigilance of our amygdala and our stress responses in our body. And anxiety does tend to manifest, thinking about what the symptoms of anxiety that people typically report. So the amygdala is going to activate our sympathetic nervous system. We got a whole episode on that. To understand the sympathetic nervous system, essentially in a nutshell, it's our fight and flight response, right? And when that is activated, a whole heap of these automatic physiological things happen in our body. And most people will report things like my temperature increases, like my body temperature increases, my heart rate goes faster, my breathing rate goes faster. I feel this heaviness and tightness in my chest, heaviness in my shoulders, my thoughts are racing. And there's all of these physical manifestations of what we call anxiety in the body. And what I look at this a little bit differently is that understanding for every single change in your heartbeat, every single change in your body temperature, every single one of those symptoms is being driven by your nervous system, by a change in your nervous system. Our heart can't change its beat without our nervous system telling it to.
The
right?
ultimate yes man.
That's right.
Yes woman, yes person.
Exactly. And so being a neurophysiologist rather than a psychologist, I look at this quite differently. I look at this through the lens of understanding what's happening in the nervous system when we're experiencing this anxiety stuff. But even from there, one of the most foundational teachings that forms the first immediate pillar of everything that Remind Institute does is understanding the difference between the brain and the mind. Because the brain is that physical organ. It has physical properties of it exists in time like now.
The grey sponge in between the ears.
Yeah, it's got time, as in right where you are listening or watching this right now. That's where your brain is. It has space, which means it's physical. We can touch it, we can measure it, all these kinds of things, right? So the brain And the amygdala, the part of the brain that is driving these responses, that is the physical element. But the mind is metaphysical. So the mind does not have properties of time, which means that our mind can go back to our 6th birthday. Our mind can go forward to the dinner that we're going to next week and don't know what to wear and it feels super stressful.
Right. Yeah.
So our mind can go forward and back. It doesn't have the property of time. It also doesn't have the property of space, which means we can't see it, we can't touch it, we can't measure it, we can't analyze it. And what's really important to understand is that where our mind goes and the activity of our mind will alter the activation of the brain. So if our mind goes to a place that is very safe, that is very warm and connected, and to a time we felt really loved, our brain responds with safety. Our body releases oxytocin in real time.
The happy drug.
Yeah, the connection, the love drug. So that will literally happen in real time, even though we're in the exact same spot. Not, we can't go back to that place, but our body will respond as if we are. And so fear responses work in the exact same way. So what happens in fear responses is that we were kind of joking about this, but next week we've got our 100th episode. If I was someone who really struggled on an ongoing basis with anxiety, I might have problems sleeping over the next week because my mind might be going forward to an event that hasn't even happened yet.
And working out all the worst case scenarios.
All the threats. Exactly. It's looking, and I use the what if. So this is a process I literally do with my clients. I'll say, I want you to finish this sentence. What if? What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? What if this? What if that? And some of them are rational, reasonable. Some of them are so irrational. Like it'd be like, what if my teacher from kindergarten saw it and thought that they did a bad job and blah, 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 blah. It's like, what? But I say, let's do a pour out. Do that what if process. Whatever comes out is actually the threats that your present moment amygdala is responding to and creating the fight or activating that fight and flight pathway in your body right here, right now, even though it's not happening. And so that's kind of the future pacing. But the past, the same thing can happen. If our mind is remembering an event from the past, and it might be like where someone really embarrassed us or someone hurt our feelings or, someone laughed at us or whatever it might have been, some kind of event or situation that happened in our past, that our mind is continuously going to, because it's got to keep us safe, it's got to protect us from that so that it doesn't happen again. It's trying to support our survival, right? But our body in real time, in today's here and now, will respond to that past event like it's happening here and now.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I have so many people in initial consultations and stuff. I will have so many people say to me, Ash, I went to the hospital because I thought I was having a heart attack and I was having chest pains. I was having all of these real things, like these real actual symptoms. But they said there was nothing wrong. They did all the tests, they did everything, and they couldn't find a reason for me to have this issue. And as soon as they've ruled out any kind of physical stuff, because, dude, I want to make sure, go see people,
Absolutely.
Get a brain scan, get them to check your heart, get them to do all of those tests, because without that, then, we're not doing due diligence. But
it's a diagnostic, just sort of rule it out.
Let's rule it out. Let's make sure that it isn't any of these other really major things. And then let's have a conversation. If it's not those things, and by the time people come to me, quite often they're like, oh, and I've been eating an organic diet and I've been on these supplements and I've seen this naturopath and I've done all these things, and they feel like they've tried everything. because all the answers that they're trying to find and all the solutions they're using are to change at the physical level.
Yeah, as opposed to the emotional.
That's right. And so we, in all of our courses, some of the things that are foundational content, we have a whole entire module on the mind versus the brain and helping people to understand that. We always go into understanding what are the other things outside of this mind and emotion stuff that can make that sympathetic nervous system a bit angry. They're things like, we've spoken about before, understanding the effects of screens on our nervous system, understanding chemicals in our environment and sleep and all of these different factors. So they're like the non-negotiables, whether you are coming to us for a parenting course, a relationship course, a mental health course. That's the stuff that if you are a human struggling in any way, shape or form, behaviorally, emotionally or relationally, that's the stuff you just need to know. And then from there, we get into the specifics. So with anxiety, hypothetically, what do you think the biggest thing is that we focus on? Understanding people's fears.
Okay.
Like
Yep.
fear of getting it wrong, fear of making mistakes, fear of letting people down, fear of not being good enough, fear of rejection, fear of abandonment. When I have these conversations with people all the time and I'll rattle off that list and I'll go, yep. Oh my gosh, all of them. And as soon as you can understand that someone else's opinion of you is actually not threatening and we can release the hurt from the past of the other times and we can go in with this newfound wisdom that whatever they say or think is actually a reflection of them. It's not a reflection of me. Like silly little things like that. That's not silly at all, but it seems silly because it just seems so little. But we need to actually process all of that fear, all of those old stored fears at the mind level, i.e. process the past experiences and process the projected meaning of the future experiences that haven't even happened yet. And also at the nervous system and the body, like the real somatic level. Because if we are holding the chemicals of that old fear in our body, then those chemicals are going to be causing those big emotional fear responses.
It's a massive one, isn't it?
It is. It's huge.
Yeah. And look, the funny thing is in my earlier years could only recognize anxiety in the extremes. For example, panic attacks. If someone's having a panic attack, right? Brown paper bag, sitting on the floor, feet, knees up, rocking, or that someone in public easily startled or jittery or highly alert or things like that. And so I sort of saw, someone said before I had anxiety, but I didn't see those extremes. I'll be like, okay, well,
you look fine.
Yeah. It's like, so understanding the subtleties of anxiety and look, going back to that, it's sort of like, well, if someone says, have you ever experienced anxiety? I'm like, no. What? No. However, as we've been going down this path, I've been seeing the subtleties of it, the activations, the sort of like when the overall noise drops with me as I've been going through this journey, then I'm starting to see the activations. So whether we call it anxiety, and I don't know if we label anxiety, which is sort of like just sort of nervous activation energy, or is anxiety the point of which it's not helpful for us anymore?
I was just going to say, I think that's a good distinction because physiologically, a certain level of stress is considered good stress. So it's not to say that any kind of stress is bad and that any kind of nervous energy is bad, but there is a point where it becomes detrimental.
Mm.
And so I think that's a really important point, because actually anxiety and excitement, fear and excitement essentially have the same pathways in the body. And so I say this to my daughter all the time, right? When she's like, oh, Mum, I feel really nervous, or I feel really, really anxious. And I'll go, okay, well, let's talk about that. Let's help to understand what fears might be at play. And then if we've dealt with all the fears that might be at play, and you still have that feeling of activation in your tummy or in your body, then what else could it be? And she'll say, oh, it's excitement. And I'll go, yes. And the two can coexist. You can have fear and excitement at the same time, but recognizing the difference between them. And this is something that only as an adult, literally last year, I really delineated, because I thought I was having a major panic attack in the airport when we were about to go overseas and leave my kids for 5 weeks. And I realized on that trip that I couldn't tell the difference between excitement and anxiety. And so what I thought was a panic attack in the airport was actually me being really excited to go on this trip, like overwhelmed, excited, and processing that as if it was anxiety and I was having a panic attack. It was so bizarre. And it only happened in those really insanely exciting like moments of going, the first morning we woke up in Cappadocia, our first morning in Turkey, was the most spectacular thing I've ever seen. And I was like, I had tears coming down my face just with overwhelmed excitement to go, this is spectacular. Like I was pinching myself going, am I really here? And being in a hot air balloon over Cappadocia and like seeing hundreds of hot air balloons around us as the sun rose, and again just going, but feeling that overwhelmed sensation of excitement energy in my body that I had processed as if it was anxiety, but I wasn't anxious, I was excited.
But it felt
the same. Yeah,
exactly.
So that was not something that I was ever taught as a kid. And so I think I was never given the chance to just be excited about something. It was like, oh, I'm anxious.
Yeah. And I think, you know, when we feel these things, it's allowing the subtleties and discovering that self-awareness, but also seeing it in others, that you can sort of have someone, like you sort of said, if they're in the past, if they're in the future, then you're not in the now. And when people sort of say, be in the moment, it's really to center back into what it is. Now, when I was younger, I could never do that. I had to always be moving, always in the future, or always, you know, just working on something just distracting. And, you know, when people would say, have you ever felt anxiety or anxious? I'm like, no, because again, my version of that would be at the extreme level. However, now I look back, it's all like, well, yeah, because I could never be in the moment.
Yeah.
And so what would stop me from coming into the moment? Well, okay, there's a lot of realizations in the moment that if I was to sit, it's like, am I happy? Am I on the right path? Is there something nagging me to do something that I am really scared of doing? These are all the things that would sort of come back unless I was distracting myself with stuff. Now, it wasn't me constantly. There was always still great times. When I say in my previous life, but that's what it feels like.
It does, doesn't it?
But it's sort of like, yeah. But in the moment, it's sort of like, okay, what's dawning upon me is, am I settling? Am I numbing? Am I... And again, so, you know, outside of the extremes, right? A lot of anxiety can be cured by being in the moment and seeing what that has as a message for you.
Yeah.
And chances are you might already know, but then go, well, I can't because of that, and I can't because of this, and I can't because I can't. Okay. There's a clue.
Yeah, absolutely.
So
oh man, I really resonated with you when you said it's like a past life.
Yes,
I say all the time, I'm like, when I look back on my past, I genuinely feel like I am talking about someone else's life. Like I feel so, it's chalk and cheese. I feel like I'm living in a completely different existence, thinking about, and this is something that comes up with clients quite often when they meet today Ash, who can be really present, who, as I am, right? They find it really hard to relate to previous Ash when I say to them, oh, I couldn't be a passenger in a car. No, I couldn't let anyone else cook dinner for me. Oh, no, I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. I couldn't do this. I couldn't do that. And they're so gobsmacked at going, what? Like, I can't even imagine you being like that. And I go, yeah, that was my life.
Mm-hmm.
I was in therapy for 20 years. I tried all the medications. I'd been on everything. I'd done everything to try and help. That was my life. I remember going to a counsellor at my uni once when I was a student. I must have been about, 17, 18. And I remember, I viscerally remember the feeling as I sat in his couch and I sat down for my first session with him going, here we go again. Oh, I got to go start at the start again and tell someone my story again. And I understand my story now. Like, I understand it. I've done all the talk therapy. I've talked it to death. I know what I'm feeling. I know what it is. I know what I'm thinking. I know, but it doesn't change. Like, nothing's changing. I still am completely incapacitated by it. And the best I felt I had ever been offered is, well, let's just work out how to live with it. Like, let's to cope with it. Here's some coping strategies.
Yeah,
and
gotcha.
That, if I had to spend the rest of my life just coping and doing the best that I could without ever going, what? I don't get to be free of this. And the way I describe it, I'm using my hands. So if you're listening, I want you to imagine that, let's say that 95% of my life was spent super, super, super highly strung, super anxious, needing to control everything at all times, always. And 5% of the time I could be present, laugh, feel happy, feel joy, whatever. It doesn't mean to say that I never, ever, ever experience those moments of anxiousness, but now it's flipped. So 95% of my life, I feel present, I feel connected, I feel joy, I can laugh, I can play, I can respond and all those kinds of things. And maybe 5%, I might be reactive or activated or whatever.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
And life in that place is so different. It's so much better. So I think that's a really, really, really big differentiator. Let's just flip it. But it's not reasonable to, actually, it's not reasonable to think that you will never feel anxiousness again, because all anxiousness is just that activation of the nervous system. But if we can break off the identity of I am anxious, no, you're not. You are a human who's experiencing anxiety in that moment, and that anxiety is telling you something.
Yeah. I mean, I felt it this morning, and at that time I'm sort of like, oh, okay. It was not something that my brain was there going, is this reasonable for you to be feeling that way? But then it was like, okay, well, I'm feeling it.
Yeah.
So there's a little something in there. Okay, all right, I'm going to be curious about this. Wonder why I'm feeling anxious about this, and then go, but it's okay to feel anxious about this. But it was a activation, right? It wasn't sort of like a crippling, can't do anything, or I lost concentration, or, or any of these things. Yeah, as you said, you're always going to sort of get it, and there's a message in it. There's something for you to, there's a gift.
Sometimes the message is, I drank too many coffees today.
I've done that.
Sometimes the message is, okay, this is a weird one. Most people who are neurodivergent will have, or who have a tendency towards that kind of activated, dysregulated nervous system, will have gut issues in some way, shape or form. And I'm not talking about like constipation, diarrhea, like the symptoms of gut issues. I'm talking about actually internally in their gut, the gut lining will be compromised in some way because the dysregulation is really inflammatory to the body, and the inflammation actually damages that gut lining. And so what that means is that the gut that would normally be keeping all of these food chemicals safely where it needs to be becomes compromised. And so food chemicals cross that kind of leaks.
Allow out, yeah.
Yeah, and so then it can affect the brain and cause inflammation, like that neuroinflammation, which then is going to have that flow-on effect. So I look at it and go, maybe amines were a really big problem for me. So on a day where I might have been experiencing symptoms of anxiety, I'll ask myself, oh my gosh, what is my body telling me at the moment? If it's not, I've had too many coffees today, or I had bacon for breakfast and also had a banana. What? That doesn't make sense, Ash. Well, yes, actually it does, because pork products are extremely high in amines, and so are bananas. So when you have the two together, the dose of amines in my body is causing this inflammation in my brain, which is causing the sensations of anxiety. Okay. And so again, like if we don't understand to listen to our body and start to understand what those activations are. And like you said, our favorite word in this show is curious. Get curious about it. And I always start with what's coming up for me right now. Is there any fear? Because that's the most obvious thing. If there's not a fear happening, then I'll start to look at, okay, what have I eaten today? Or sometimes what have I not eaten today? Because blood sugar regulation can have a really big impact on dysregulation as well. So if I haven't eaten, maybe that anxiousness or activation feeling in my body is a blood sugar issue, and it would completely resolve if I just had something to eat.
Yeah,
you know?
Okay. Yeah.
So it's this really holistic way of looking at anxiety beyond that medical diagnosis of, okay, well, you have anxiety and this is why you have that problem. Oh, well, no, let's look at what's happening inside the body, what's happening in the mind that's causing that problem, because telling me I have anxiety is not helping me with said anxiety.
Yeah.
And so that's the frustration that I had as a customer of the mental health system for over 20 years. And I hope that people get insight from this episode.
And look, I mean, anxiety is such a broad thing. You know, when we're sort of talking about sort of trauma or CPTSD, PTSD and all of those type of things, anxiety attached to those type of things obviously require more attention and a bit more fleshing out. What we're sort of talking about is just that general awareness of, anxiety overall in probably I'd sort of say a lesser capacity when it's not attached to these bigger events. But
I disagree.
Really?
I disagree, because even if that anxiety is coming from past trauma, or even if that anxiety is coming from something attached to the past, the process is still exactly the same.
It's going to feel bigger.
It feels
what
bigger.
I'm trying to say is more
whether
that
it's the mind in the future or the past. So future is future fears, past is attached to the past events and past trauma. Then we need to process that. And whether it's the body, again, I think we need to process that. So I don't separate like a general anxiety versus an anxiety that's attached to a past trauma or anything like that, because I feel like our process is going to be much the same. And this is what I think is the hardest thing for people to understand, because people with PTSD have been told for many, many years there's nothing you can do about it. General medical model doesn't understand PTSD because PTSD is primarily of the mind. It's not of the body. They don't know how to deal with that. So
what I'm more talking about is the tone of this episode has been a little bit more focused on not the bigger traumatic things. It's the overall anxiety thing. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
The ways in which to fix it or to release it, exactly the same. But the amount and the feeling and, I could almost say the grandiose of what you have to go through, we've sort of stuck to the lighter side of it. Not saying that the way to release it's not any different.
Yeah.
Just feels a whole lot bigger. So anyway.
I think that's exciting. It's exciting for people, hopefully, to get the message that whether this is a low-key, generalized thing that is chronic for you that you just live with every day versus whether it's almost like triggered responses to stimuli, like in PTSD or something like that, that once you can have an understanding of what is happening in your body and why it's happening, then you're absolutely set. You know what to do to be able to overcome it. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we completely changed our model to doing our online courses, because it makes this accessible for people. If I had to sit there and spend all of my time in every single session with every single client teaching them about this stuff one-on-one, I would be able to help a drop in the ocean. But by being able to package all of this up and then create a meaningful journey for people to be able to lead themselves through their own unique brain and nervous system and past and future and fears and all that sort of stuff on a personalized level, it means that we can support the whole ocean if we could access it,
Yeah. You're not time limited.
Yeah.
I love that distinction that you made there. You sort of put what I was trying to say in perfectly. It's like that either you're dealing with it on a lower level constantly and grinding through it versus having those really intense sort of triggers that, I feel as though we were talking more about that slow grind daily.
Yeah.
So you've said it very, very, very well.
Yeah,
Thank
amazing.
you very much.
That's okay. Well, as of the time of the release of this episode, we currently have wait lists for our courses. They're not released yet, but they're not far off. So what we'll do is in the show notes, in the description below, we will put the waitlist link. And once the course is fully released, you can, we'll replace that link with the actual course link so that if anyone is struggling with this and they do want help, you can just go there straight away and you'll be either on the wait list, first to know when it comes out, or you'll have immediate access to the course if you're watching this down the track. So
brilliant. And next episode's going to be live, so that's going to be pretty exciting. So
we'll be excited, not anxious.
Well, maybe a bit of both.
Two things can be true at once.
That's it. All right, guys. So look out on the socials about when we're doing our live. More details to come, but T-minus 7 days. We're doing it next Wednesday. Next Wednesday.
Friday.
Next Friday. There we go. Glad I'm not doing the scheduling. All right. See you next week, guys.
Bye.
Have a great one. Bye-bye.